Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to do a technique called lathing, where we make a wine glass, make a simple model, and we're also going to look at some high dynamic range environmental lighting, and I'll look at a little bit of shading, making glass and the properties of glass in an image. So this is the generic sort of opening scene in Blender. So we have our cube, our lamp here, and our camera. So I'm going to start with my cube. So by default in Blender, it's 2 units by 2 units, or 2 meters by 2 meters. So that's quite big. So I'm going to press S and then Z. I'm going to scale this down on the Z axis and make it thin. And this is going to be like a tabletop for us. So I'm going to leave that there for now, and we'll get back to shading in a moment. I'm going to press the N key. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's go over here and click on this little tab here in our properties, which is a little cube. So this is an object. So I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it table. One of the things we haven't done is name things, and as models get quite complex and have lots of different objects in them, labeling gets very important. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make my glass. So I'm going to add another object. So I'm going to go Shift A, add. I'm going to go add mesh plane, and the new plane I've added is actually inside this one. So I'm going to go into edit mode for this plane, and I'm going to go press W and then merge vertices at center, and we have this vert here at the center. Now we're going to press 1 and 5 on the numpad, and I'm zooming in a little bit, and now I'm going to press G and Z to lift this vertex just a little bit above the ground plane. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a modifier, a mirror modifier. Now we've used these once before when we were making our initial character. So we're going to go add modifier, mirror modifier, and we're going to leave the clipping turned off for a second. So if I zoom out a little bit, I'm going to draw freehand one side, or one kind of loop of a glass. So I'm going to press E and extrude outwards, and E again, and E back in. This is going to be sort of the base of my glass. I press E, go up, and E again, and this is sort of the neck of the glass. And then I'm going to try and make a sort of little wine glass here, and you can tell from my design that I don't drink much wine. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down, and I'm just trying to basically extrude the outline of a glass. Now I'm going to turn on clipping here for a second, and I'm going to press G and X, and I'm going to move this vertex right into the middle until I can't move it anymore to the left. I'm going to do the same with this one, G and X. And that way I know that it's completely in the center, and clipping stops me from going all the way across. So we want to go through a process with this called spinning it. Excuse me. So before I do that, I'm going to select it all, because it'll only spin or only lathe the objects or the vertices that are selected. And the spin tool is over here. But before we spin, if I spin now, I'll get a weird result. So that is not a wine glass. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z, and the spin takes effect from basically from the perspective that you're looking. So what we want to do is I'm going to press 7 on the numpad and look from the top, so top orthographic. So I'm going to press spin again and then click here. And you can see in this little box here that's appeared, this dialog box, it's telling me that it has spun our wine glass 90 degrees, and we want it actually to spin 360. So I'm going to type 360 and hit enter. Now I've got a glass. And I can also determine how many vertices are in this, so how many vertical lines. So at the moment there's 9, I can go 10. And the more of these I put in, the smoother the surface will be. So there's 24. So I'm going to leave that like that, and I'm going to go out now into object mode. Now, I'm going to add another modifier, which is a subdivision surface modifier. And hopefully when I turned it on there, you could see that it got more rounded. So I'm going to apply my mirror modifier. And now I'm going to have a look here at this. So this is not smooth. You can see the individual faces that make up this object. So let's have a look and see if we can... so we're going to go to Object, and down here there are two options. One is Shade Smooth and Shade Flat. By default it's Shade Flat, so you can see individual faces. So now I'm going to hit Shade Smooth, and you should see that the faces now are continuous as opposed to each one being visible. So this now looks a lot more like a wine glass. Now it's not perfect, we still have a small anomaly there, but we'll worry about that later. So that is the extent of the modeling we're going to do in this tutorial, and the rest of this is going to be having a bit of fun with shading nodes and backgrounds. So I'm just going to save this. I'm going to go File, Save As, and we'll call it Glass. Now, with the base here, I'm going to do some UV unwrapping on that. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to the UV Editing tab. Now I'm going to go into Edit mode. I'm going to look from the top and press U, Project from View. And here's my projection. And over here I'm going to open an image. And on my desktop I've saved an image with a wooden texture, and press Open. So there's my wooden texture, and I'm going to press S and just scale this up so it kind of fills the or so that there's more detail going to be shown on the surface. Okay, so that's the only UV unwrapping we have to do. Now I'm going to go to shading. Now this flat surface here, which is going to be our table, this was the default cube. So the default cube has a material when we start in Blender. Excuse me. So I'm just going to widen our properties window here a little bit and click on the materials tab. So it has a material called material, so we'll call this wood. And what we're going to do over here is, as we did in class, we're going to go add texture, image texture, connect the color out to the base color, and then we're going to use our wooden texture. And as we can see here, we've got a wooden texture underneath our glass. Very good. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to change the background. So I'm going to do that by going first of all to object mode, so I'm no longer editing this object. And down here in my shading panel or my node panel, I can right click on my my object here, my glass. This has no material. I can right click on the wood and see its material, but I can also change here from object to world, and I can see what the world has, what the world is set up to be. And also over here I can click on this little icon, which is the world setting, and I'm going to click this button here, use nodes, which basically means use this interface. Now by default I've got a background here, background color, and if I look up here under shading, I can say use the scene world, which is gray. So if I change this here, you'll see that I can change the background color. So this is a nice powerful tool. Just before I change this, because obviously we don't want it to be completely green, just to point out that the glass, or what will be glass, and this wood are illuminated by the color that we pick. So if I make this brighter or darker, okay. So I'm going to delete this background here, so I can right click on the output, or I can right click on the background. So I'm going to delete that. And now I'm going to add in, so I'm going to go Shift A, add, and we want an environmental texture. And I'm going to connect my color out to my surface. Now it's turned pink because it's saying you haven't told us what image to use. So I'm going to press open, and then here I've got two images. I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to hit open, and you can see that we're inside a room. Okay. And no matter how much I zoom in and zoom out on my objects, the background is still the background. And that is a high dynamic range background image or environmental image that we're using. This is a really cool feature that we can use in Blender. You can use in most 3D packages to illuminate our objects. Very quickly, I'm just going to press 0 on the numpad with my mouse over here to see what the camera sees. I'm going to right click on the camera, then press the N key, and I'm going to press this button here, lock camera to view, and then just maybe reposition myself a little bit. To about, well, let's put something in the background. Let's do that. Okay, I'm going to turn this off, the lock camera to view. So this is what the camera sees. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to work on this glass. So I'm going to right click on the glass. I'm going to move off the world shading and back to object shading. And this glass here has no material. So I'm going to go to the material, I'm going to click new, and I'm going to rename this glass. Now by default we have the principal shader, so I can change the color of this object, and that's fine, but I'm not going to use this. I'm going to delete it, and I'm actually going to add in a completely different shader called a glass shader, and I'm going to connect from here to here. Now there's only two real variables that we can color the glass if we want, but we're going to leave it white for now. There's two real variables that we've got here. So we've got the refractive index here of the glass, so how the light bends through it, and the roughness of the glass. So roughness is going to be, we're going to frost up the glass like you would have in a bathroom window, and then the refractive index is how much the light bends through the glass. So is it completely crystal clear, like a crystal goblet, or is it really frosty, opaque sort of glass? So I'm going to play with these two settings for a minute. You can already see as I spin the glass around that it has some reflective properties. So I'm going to start by reducing this refractive index, and excuse me, hopefully what you'll see is as the number decreases, the image gets clearer and clearer. Okay. So I'm just going to look through the camera, and I'm going to render that. So I'm going to press F12, and then I'm going to jump to my rendered view. So that's what the picture looks like finished. I'm going to go back to shading. I'm going to bring this up to 1.4, which is sort of the default setting in Blender, and I'm going to increase the roughness a little bit, and you'll see it sort of fog up. So I'm going to render that and go to my rendered panel, and you can see it's not great, but there are certain glasses that will look like that. And then we'll go in the other direction, so we'll see what increasing this a great deal will do. We'll F12 on that to render, and that's our final picture. And then with this set very high, we'll increase the roughness. So big changes don't really suit this. So all of the interesting things, all the interesting changes are around this value here, 1.2, 1.3, anything between 0.6 and 0.8 or 1.8 will give you quite dramatic changes in the properties of the glass, and will behave in ways that you would be familiar with just by holding a glass up to the light. So I'm going to reposition my camera here a little bit, just maybe to get a more favorable view. We'll do that. Click back on the glass, and then just playing with some of these settings. So oops, I brought the wrong one to 0. But you can see it's so anyway, we can play around with these all day, so obviously. So what we're going to do in class is we're going to kind of replicate this, and we are going to see if we can come up with an interesting setup that's sort of believable, not necessarily photorealistic, but is believable. And we'll do that by maybe picking a different background image, so maybe a world image more like this one, and by maybe changing the position of the camera and the properties of the glass shader to give us a more realistic finished look. So we'll finish now and pick this up in class tomorrow.